the cities that we work with.
Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Paul from ICLEI Africa. Partner in crime seems to be our new relationship with ACC, which is always exciting. Buzz is the device that we used in a previous workshop when people were offering their buzzwords and not explaining. And it was a moment to pause and offer some shared understanding of the perspectives that we were bringing into a room. And I think being at COP, where you're surrounded by tons of buzzwords, tons of slogans, you realize that they're actually shorthand for incredibly deep discourses that there's a whole crew of people examining and trying to make meaning of. But sometimes those buzzwords and that language get stuck. I really liked Geshe's notion of this hegemonic understanding of how things work. And so the so what of being in this room to me is that it's a space to nourish each other, working on deepening our work, to broaden our horizons, to explore new languages, and to this point of creating possibilities. So what I was sharing earlier about our work with RISE is trying to create a space in which you're broadening people's understanding of how their own work impacts everyone else, and broadening their ability to, as Malika Ndlovu will say, to language our cities together. So you'll see the slide came up. Yulisa beautifully led into this as her opening for the previous session. The next theme for RISE Africa is the cities we want. It is a direct critique of AU Agenda 2063, the Africa we want, which mentions urbanization incredibly minimally. And this is 40 years, next year will be 40 years before that agenda is supposed to be achieved or realized. So this is our invitation to this community of people embedded in other communities to bring your ideas into this space in whatever format that will be: critique, celebration, joy. So it's been a pleasure to join you for the last 3 days, and look forward to continuing the conversations.
Lovely. Maarten?
I can speak in this mic, then please do not switch on the other one. I was here particularly to listen and looking for what I could contribute, what my role could be. And so I noticed that if we talk sort of, so let me make a point as a public policy scholar and as a planner. So the public policy point is we lost all the energy when we started to talk about coordination, regulation, and so everything was gone. We gained energy when we spoke about exciting, innovative initiatives and so forth. Yet, I mean, in light of what the urban challenge is, we need to talk about public policy. So how can you do that? And I think that starts with taking very seriously the worries of elected officials and the fact that they are in a constant threat of a loss of legitimacy. So what can you do as a community, as a coalition, to cater for that? And I think that is to be about defining what are symbolically strong interventions that within an electoral cycle can show what you stand for. And we may be able as a coalition to help what these interventions are. And I was reminded of the Latin American examples, where mayors did things in the public domain that immediately were recognized by people. Okay, this is a mayor that stands for our interest. So it can be Currie with the bus lanes and so forth. But it all is achievable in that cycle of 4 years. They get re-elected for making cities more sustainable. So how do you translate that in this particular context? I think that's important. So the symbolic is at least as important in public policy as is the coordination element of it. That was my one point. The other point about the urban planning, I think what was good is that we saw that nobody, unless it was a critique, was talking about these modernist sort of infrastructure interventions that are always costly afterwards. But so they, by and large, were on a neighborhood level. But then, I mean, it's one thing to show the image of how of these working interventions, but I think the scholarly attempt is then to make understand why they worked. And that, I think, is something where the brothers from ICLEI and C40 and so forth could be a tremendous help. And also networks of universities with ACC in a leading role, where you could say, well, we actually can create a repository of not only these symbolically strong examples, but also spell out the rules and the resources that make them work. So, and although the context is obviously very different, I think in that neighborhood book that we drew up, we said there are actually 4 things that always come back. It's storylines and symbols. It is the need for skin in the game, so no actors that just are there for a quick buck and bugger off, but how you can organize that there is a skin in the game. The resources, so is there something like a neighborhood value chain, that things are recouped, that money comes back and stays in the neighborhood if value is created by the ingenuity of the people that undertook these experiments. And finally, the rules that help you explain why these things have worked. And if we on these 4 levels could, you know, share examples, explain why they work, perhaps then, you know, all these cities that suffer under the fact that they don't have the capacity can be equipped to nevertheless have these sparkling results that we need.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't have such a lot to say. I'm Aklilu from the World Resources Institute. I'm the Director of Cities for Africa. So it's indeed like learning platform, like sharing knowledge and experience all the way from very small projects shared from specific area to the city level and some implications to the national. So it's like all the way from small to the broader policy level. So it's really, I should say that it's really a learning and experience and sharing platform, and I really appreciate this platform for that. So it's really important, I have to say, that how do we frame Africa's urbanization and the way infrastructure been designed and should be designed. So I have to really underscore and really underline that the whole package, when we see urbanization, there is a need to think of like cities as a system. That's how we call also within WRI. So cities are not sectors. Urban is not a sector. So let's consider that as really a system, a functioning system that could be really improved. I'm not saying that we have to improve everything like once, but it's really good to have that system in mind. If some button within the city being hit, then it may affect or really to improve others. So it's really good to have that in mind. And in the collaboration, the need, and all those things have been mentioned. But I think the issue of convening power, the last panelist mentioned, I think it's really good to see, yes, we as WRI, we say that we are best conveners because we produce data, research, facts, and people can come. But the other part of convening power is the government, you know, the power, the elected people. So that's also needed for if we want to change the city. But I want to mention that the whole aspect of financing infrastructure, I was looking from the perspective of like funding coming from external web donors or financial institutions. What about improving the local capacity to really fund the infrastructure? I mean, the cities, I think that could really evolve the city's potential to finance the infrastructure. Another, just one point, is the informality we've been discussing about the informal settlements and everything. So how about the informal economy financing the infrastructure in Africa? Because African economy, the city is particularly dominated with the informality. So finally, as a final note, this kind of like platform that brings ideas about discussing the African context is really significant. It should be really continued, where to understand who is doing what. And the issue of the last, I have to say just one single word, I'm sorry, is that Africa, considering Africa as a country, that has been affecting us, all of us actually. It's really good to go the country level and country-specific issues, just from there, also city level. So that's really key. I have to really appreciate that. And so for that, we have to bring our ideas to the table and have this kind of platform. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. I've listened, I've learnt, I've laughed, which makes it a pretty good couple of days. And thank you, everyone, for your generosity and for Edgar for organising such an amazing event. I just wanted to share a few thoughts. The first is, this event for me as an outsider to Africa is specifically African. And I hear your comment about we have to go down to the granularity of countries and individual cities. But I think the unity across Africa also matters. As someone who is not from Africa, what I see is pride, practicality, purpose, creativity, innovation, entrepreneurialism, a continent that is asset-rich in terms of sun, wind, nature, and the next generation. Those are the foundations for the way forwards. The second question I asked myself was, what are we trying to address here? What is really the problem? What is it that we can actually all unify around and persuade people who aren't here to unify around? And I think it's resilience. That word wasn't mentioned until the very last talk by Vera. But actually, what we're all trying to do is ensure that communities in Africa can thrive, adapt, and flourish when we know the road ahead is very, very bumpy. And for many people, it already is. And that reality should be a sense check on every conversation we have. Vera said that I always ask the so what. I also always ask the why. Why are we here? What is it we're really trying to achieve? We're trying to ensure that communities in Africa can thrive, adapt, and flourish in a world full of uncertainty and ambiguity going forwards. My work on resilience of urban communities has been echoed in so many things, the ingredients of urban resilience, and I've just learned so much. I've expanded that list. It's about people. It's about ensuring that everyone has access to basic needs. But it's also that soft infrastructure of institutions and culture that are really important to glue society together and make things possible. And then the grey and the blue and the green infrastructure, which we have to look after. But it's also about data and informed decisions, empowered individuals, and getting through the politics and power dynamics. I challenge those of you who have said that what we need is a solution, what we're looking for is solutions to complex challenges. I don't believe in an abstract intellectual view of life. I think the way forwards is the people who are espousing incremental interventions, innovation, empowered individuals, and collaborative action. We can't over-intellectualize this. We need to get on and work together and do it. So I end with the so what. And it applies to me too. So what are you going to do or do differently as a result of being here the last 2 days? And who are you going to join hands with? Because none of us can do it alone.
Stay where you are. Thanks, colleagues, partners, collaborators, leaders. I'm going to give the floor back to Edgar, but won't you just come back here for a second, Edgar? There's no bow, there's no flowers. But what we asked all the other partners to do is to give a name and to give an organization. And that is because individuals work in organizations and through organizations. And so many of the partners that you see there, and the partners that you see there, and the partners that line the cities that are beyond, not all of them, but many of them have been catalyzed by Edgar through ACC. And Edgar, we've had a wonderful couple of days, and we have had just a fabulous time, and so it was just a thank you from everybody here for all your work.
Thanks, Sue. I don't can eat that. Thank you, Sue. Thanks. And the panelists, that was really wonderful to just have your voices and views in the room. So I want to just share some concluding reflections, not as a summary, but as maybe a few threads to connect us back to where we started. But I guess I'm kind of, I've been provoked by two things in the last round, and so I'll first respond to the provocations, and then I'll share my concluding reflections. So Joe, I want to take issue with your concluding comment that it's about resilience and adapting, because I think, yes, that's true. But there's a step before that, and it's about 3 R's. It's about a recognition of the violence that the colonial inheritance has wrought on nature, on people, on our societies, on our institutions, that endures. And that recognition has to lead to a conversation about reparations. So there's a big debate in the climate space between justice and reparations. The justice focus is a strategic halfway point, but we have to talk about reparations. And the contemporary translation of a reparations conversation has got to be about modalities of redistribution. You cannot have a world as damaged and intentionally being destroyed without talking about recognition, reparations, and redistribution. And then we can reflect collectively about what is the cost and who pays the price for adaptation and resilience and flourishing. So that's my one quibble. My second quibble is that the program was curated for South Africans to get over themselves. We don't. And I was struck by a couple of reflections when my dear friends and fellow South Africans would remark into the space. And we've had some brilliant African colleagues here sharing some incredible work, not making explicit the different conditions from which they work, but they are, if you kind of look close enough, they're so glaring. And I still find that we just can't get out of our frame of reference as South Africans. And I'm not quite sure what do we do about that, right? And this is just a very raw reflection. Because I am pretty sure that despite our endowments that we have, the incredible wealth, resources, institutional capability, talent, and so on, that we are going to persist to destroy ourselves because we just can't learn and we can't listen. We just can't. It's incredible. My closing reflections is that the point of this was to kind of collate the different institutional sectors that all have a vested interest to work through this puzzle of this catalytic thing we call infrastructure, which of course isn't a thing because it is many things and has both material manifestations but also symbolic and emotive and affective dimensions that in fact are strangely preconditions to remake the material manifestation. And the academic conference and this conference kind of bleeding into each other was a little bit about creating the conceptual framework to allow us to see those interdependencies, but recognize that in policy and political terms, you have to have this very practical entry point of the thing, the money, the institution, the process, the temporality, the risk, the calculation, and so forth, to be able to act on that thing. But there was also a secret agenda. And the secret agenda is that ACC is on the cusp of changing its life. We're ending a third sort of strategic moment in the life of the organization, and we will spend 2 days together as an organization in about just over a week's time. That's not me, I think, no. That used to happen to me a lot when I speak. Where we're going to reflect about the next 7 years, where we're going, who we are, etc., etc. And so this was an elaborate ruse to get all of our friends and the people we admire and the people doing amazing work to really inspire us and remind us of what the stakes are, but more importantly, and this is the wonderful thing about being in the academy, is you're allowed to be in love with questions, is to figure out what are the questions that we need to fall in love with again. And I have certainly been overwhelmed with many things, and I thought, oh, it's that, and that. And it's just an amazing thing to be seduced by too many fantastic questions. And that was my experience over the last 3 days. And so thank you to everyone who have shared that for us. More concretely, for us, what will go into the pipe that we will be smoking over the next while is to try and work out how to translate, I guess, 4 or so big buckets of stuff that we've got to process. So the first is that frame of transition that Anton was talking about. How do we think simultaneously about urbanization, industrialization, and climate as a shorthand, and recognizing, as another point that was made, that we're talking about different temporalities, different speeds. I think Michael made that point very beautifully. And so that's a complicated thing. Secondly, to think that in relation to a very close reading and paying attention to a multiplicity of practices that is happening in our cities. And part of paying attention to the practices and picking up on the point Teresh was making is that there's a set of dynamics and logics at play here which are unprecedented. And you need not only to kind of do the investigative work, the forensic work to make sense of that, but you also have to be able to narrativize that. You've got to translate them and render them and make them beautiful, make them clear, make them compelling, make them intelligible, so that you can begin to feed them into what the last panel was about. And so there's a filter we need to apply, and I think that is the function, potentially, of innovation ecosystems that we heard about in the last panel. And Dilip mentioned in his keynote this word dredging, and so I'm wondering in my mind whether that's a useful metaphor, but I think filter is better. Not 100% sure, Dilip, but yeah, dredging is living in the back of my brain. I'll come back to you on that. And so on this point of innovation ecosystems, there is, for me, from what I've heard from the various presentations and practices and so on, it seems to me, and I don't know what's a better word, so I'll stick with this placeholder, design parameters, criteria, if you will, that we need to apply. And so as an academic institution working in the world and driven by practice questions and theorizing from practice, there's a task to document, and there's a lot going on, and we are not keeping up. There's a piece about experimentation, and that is to hold the space for different knowledges to come together with all of the messiness that Liza reminded us of. And then there is this need to co-produce new things, new modalities, new institutional forms, new habits, new reference points, new interests, if you will, and fundamentally new institutional capabilities to do things differently to achieve other kinds of outcomes. So for me, innovation ecosystems could hold that as a thing. But at the core of that experimentation and that figuring out has got to be an absolute insistence that when we say, yes, let's make a move, let's try something out, that it has to fulfill a couple of criteria. It's got to be culturally resonant, clearly. It's got to be functionally effective, the points Joe was making. It's got to make an impact. It's got to work. It's got to be investable. It's got to make sense financially, right? So we know all the limitations of that. We've heard all of that. It's got to be technologically open, adaptive, and again, Geshe and Abi's points on around that was really interesting. And very importantly, in our urban context, it's got to enhance safety. There's something about the terror and the violence of urban poverty and inequality that we haven't quite gotten to, and I think Neil reminded us a little bit of some of that in one of his reflections in this. And that is so, so fundamental if we are going to create the possibility of people trusting these processes. And another criteria has got to be affordable. So it's got to kind of make sense, not just investable, but it's got to be affordable. And that can only happen if it is, and I think Vera's presentation was very clear in this, if it is deeply co-produced, right? But what an amazing privilege we have, what an exhilarating opportunity is, both to create, to be a practitioner, to be a leader, that we get to wrestle with all of these beautiful problems. They're fantastic problems. They're incredible that we have the privilege and the time and the responsibility to engage with them. But because it is so much at the same time, we need filters, we need spaces, we need repositories, we need ways to navigate all of that information. And I think all of us are working on parts of that puzzle. And so I've heard the provocation that the next conference in 2043, I think that is, will be on innovative leadership. I am certainly, I'm so tired that that's like the earliest I think I can imagine organizing another thing. But we'll play with more themes. So those are just an attempt to draw together as someone who's kind of one foot into our strat planning, thinking about ACC, where we're going, and everything I've heard over the last 3 days and everything I've felt over the last 3 days, what some of the things are that is uppermost in my mind. So I'm enormously grateful that you all came, that people pitched. I feel so validated in my failed parenthood because none of my kids listened to me. I wrote detailed briefs to all the chairs, no one paid attention, all the speakers, no one paid attention. So it is really good to be validated that, you know, certain capabilities just like is never going to get traction. So, but nevertheless, you were all fabulous, brilliant, doing your thing. And in my mind, the point of our diversity is to end off with that comment about treating Africa as one conceptual category, is that we have to really just be okay with the completely different places we come from. And I hope you could sense each panel at that intense diversity reflected, and hopefully from that something kind of was provoked, because you were meant to feel discomfort at many moments over the last 2.5 days. And hopefully that discomfort has generated something novel, despite your deep experience and insight and understanding. So I just want to thank the team, and I need a phone to know if I arrange a bouquet for myself. So I just want to make sure that it's here. Where's my bouquet? Ithra. So I just want to invite the team up. Where's the team? Where's Ithra and everyone else? Oh, you're there. Okay, sorry. I didn't see you come in. So Ithra is my anchor and life support. So I can't really do this job with Ithra, making sure everything is enabled. And of course, I've relied on her again to make sure that the last bit of this works. So there's a whole bunch of people that I thanked at the academic conference. I'm not going to go through that full list because I'm desperate to finish right on time at 4. But you all know who you are. I've acknowledged you before. But one of our team, Shakira, has been absolutely central to get everyone here, to get everyone a hotel, to just worry about everything that is involved in all of this. And Shakira's a rock star is the term we've used, and and she just takes enormous amount of care in the work that she does, and has been absolutely central to this conference. So please come forward. And then the other person I just want to single out is Alma Viviers, whose title is Communications Officer at ACC, but she's actually a magician. So thank you, Alma. Appreciate it. Again, thank you, everyone, for coming. There is a fantastic book launch. Jenny Robinson over there. She's like, you know, one of our so for us nerds in the academy, she's like, "Brr." So Jenny's launching a new book, so it's a super big deal. And it's going to happen in another building on the other side of campus called EGS, and find someone from UCT to get you there. That will start together at 4:30. And please have more conversations. We've run out of goodies to feed you with. So you'll have to fend for yourself, I think. That's right. The baristas have gone home. So end of that. 3-4 free cappuccinos a day. Anyway, so please join us for the book launch at 4:30 for 5 in the EGS building. And thank you very much for being here.